Welcome to the Stetzer ChurchLeaders Podcast, where we're helping Christian leaders navigate and lead through the cultural issues of our day. My name's Daniel Yang, the director of the Sen Institute, and our guest today is Steve Carter. Steve is a pastor, speaker, podcaster, and the former lead teaching pastor of Willow Creek Community Church. He's an itinerant preacher and teacher for churches, conferences, and events, and he's also the author of his latest book, The Thing Beneath the Thing, What's Hidden Inside and What God Helps Us Do About It.
You say it like 5 times. The thing
beneath the thing.
Okay, I like it.
We're excited to talk more with Steve about it, but before we do that, let's hear from our host, editor-in-chief of Outreach Magazine and the executive director of the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center, Ed Stetzer.
Well, it is good to have Steve on, and Steve and I go back, and we'll talk some about that in just a bit. But we're particularly excited to talk about a very timely book. We have seen Christian leaders where the thing beneath the thing has actually overcome the thing and more. And so I'm super excited that you wrote this book, found it helpful, challenging, and more, Steve. So thanks for joining us in this conversation. And let's just start with this. What did you mean by the phrase, the thing beneath the thing, and what made you want to write a book on the topic?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's great to see you guys. I just think the world of you two and love the chance to anytime I get to chop it up with you both. And the thing beneath the thing actually was a phrase that a mentor had said to me. One day we were on the verge of moving from Grand Rapids, Michigan to a new kingdom assignment in Southern California at Rock Harbor. And I was stressed. It was about 2008. It was hard to sell a home in Michigan. And I was completely unaware of what was going on within me. The people who had decided to back out of our house, or who buy our house, decided to back out of our house. My father had leukemia. I was leaving my grandparents' home one day and just had all this stuff inside me when all of a sudden in a snowstorm, a huge chunk of ice hit our windshield. And I realized somebody threw that at us. And I flipped a U-turn, pulled the car over, left my wife and 9-month-old in the back of the car, and I went chasing after these kids who threw a chunk of ice at our car. And as I started to realize why I was doing what I was doing, it was because I was afraid. People had backed out of buying our house. I was stressed. I was sad to leave my dad, who was sick. I knew God was inviting us into this new assignment, but I didn't want to leave a community that I loved. And so I did not know how to access my heart. And all of a sudden, this chunk of ice gave me permission. So when I called a mentor of mine the next day, he laughed and he just said, "Welcome to the thing beneath the thing, the endless discovery of what's really going on." And that phrase just stuck. I realized, man, we are people who live above the surface and we never spend enough time mining what's really going on underneath. And last thing I'd say about it is Paul says in Romans, I do not understand what I do. And I like to quote the scriptures, but when I don't follow through on something, or I do something that's pretty bonehead or dumb, I can't tell my wife, "Hey, babe," just like Paul says, "I do not understand what I do." She's going to say, "Start understanding, Steve." Right?
Dude, that's awesome.
And so this has been my attempt to try to help people understand a little bit more why they do what they do by accessing the thing beneath the thing.
Steve, I appreciate a couple of things about you. Number one, your passion for Wolverine basketball. Like I just, you're on your.
He had a sports podcast. So,
that's right.
Do you still do the sports podcast?
Yeah, we just took a little season break because
a season break because it's a season.
Because it's
right.
a sports thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, you're a great communicator. So, and one of the things that you talk about is insecurity, which people can understand that in different ways, but you phrase it as this idea of false narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves, and how that contributes to the worst of us, especially in stressful situations. Like, unpack that a little bit. Like, tell us about insecurities, false narratives, and how really stress can actually bring those things out of us.
Yeah, whenever we get triggered, it's the setup that sets us off. So something happens, you're going through your day, somebody cuts you off, someone doesn't follow through, someone minimizes you on Twitter, someone tries to manage you. All of a sudden, that's connected to old pain points in your story. And somebody's gotten close to that old pain point that we've not actually dealt with. but we all tend to go to different places. For some of us, we go into hiding. But for a lot of us, we go into insecurity. And that's where we just create false stories about ourselves, or narratives where we create false stories about other people. And what's amazing is, I would say this as a student pastor all the time to parents. Kids are very, very perceptive. They're just not always the best interpreters of reality. So kids can perceive that mom and dad are fighting, but it's the stories that they tell where they get themselves in trouble. Mom and dad are fighting because of me. Mom and dad are getting divorced because of me. And we do this on the regular, right? We get triggered and all of a sudden, oh, I'm not enough. Oh man, I'll never be as good as this person. Oh man. And all of a sudden the enemy comes in, and insecurity, we forget that we're creating God's image. We forget the spiritual gifts that God's given to us. And all of a sudden the lies of the enemy just take over, or we look for villains and we get triggered. And it's easy for us to create actual stories that are false about another person, another race, another church, another person that we feel competitive towards, than actually deal with the thing beneath the thing. And so for me, it's been realizing, and it all kind of came out of a story, because someone had minimized an idea of mine in a meeting, and it frustrated me. And I came home and told my wife, and my wife looks at me and goes, "Isn't God so kind?" And I'm like, "What do you mean God's so kind? This guy was a jerk in the meeting. Have my back." And she's like, I'm like, "Why is God so kind?" She goes, "God's so kind that he keeps bringing people into your life who remind you of someone who deeply wounded you. And until you have the courageous curiosity to deal with that, you're going to continue to look for villains, and your life's going to be held in check." And so for me, I realized that God's kindness is to actually fill in those pain points, those potholes, those parts in our story that we've been wounded, so we don't have to live in insecurity or creating false narratives, but we can live in the trust and the security of who he created us and made us to be.
Yeah, I've really found the book helpful. And again, I want to remind people again, it's called "The Thing Beneath the Thing: What's Hidden Inside and What God Helps Us to Do About It." The title is impossibly too long, but you can talk to your publisher about that. But even in this conversation, people are listening and saying, "Steve Carter, Willow Creek," and what is this coming from? Is this related to the Willow Creek? Problems, disaster, 100 different things. And we were, just before we came on, you and I were both scrolling back through our texts. And May 27th, 2018, we were texting back and forth as the Chicago Tribune story came out, as Willow Creek seeks reconciliation, pastors' accusers seek independent inquiry. And we talked several times and kind of went through some of these conversations. And then that morning on August 5th, 2018, I texted you the New York Times story. I'm sure others did, but and that's the day you left. You did the Saturday night service at Willow Creek. I remember when you called me and asked me what I knew, and this was way before the August when you walked out that morning. But this was new information that was coming to you, and boy, just some of these revelations became heartbreaking. Abusers, abuse, and survivors, and nowhere would all of this unfold. 5 months before, would you know all of this would unfold? So I sort of wonder how much of this story, your concern for this story, is based on part of the journey that you walked through when some of these things underneath the things came over and took over everything, and so many lives were impacted, so many people were hurt, and more. So to the degree you're comfortable, reflect a little bit on that journey and maybe how that might be a lesson related to the thing beneath the thing.
Yeah. Well, first off, man, again, you were really, really kind with your time, and I'll just never forget a few times you picking up the phone or just returning texts, and just, I needed friends. I needed help. This was a huge story, and I wanted to pastor people well. And, there's a handful of people that I thank God for on a regular, and you're one of them, for the ways that just you gave wisdom and helpful guidance in times that I didn't know what to believe, to be honest. It was just really, really, it was really hard. And I think for me, you know, we love like Christian TMZ. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of people who would love to know what happened in the boardroom, what happened here, what happened here. And I've got thoughts and I've got stories, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. I really wanted to, the question that kept like, I just felt like wrestling within was, why do we do what we do? Like, Paul writes, I don't understand what I do. The good I want to do, I just don't do. But the thing I hate, I do. And this wasn't just Bill. This was happening all around us in different pastors, different, media moguls, different athletes, different business leaders. And as a pastor for 20 years, nobody came into my office and was like, you know what? Today's the day, Steve. Today's the day I'm going to train wreck my life. Today's the day I'm going to sabotage all the good. Today's the day that I'm going to decimate my character. But it happens. And, I don't think I've ever told you this, Ed, but like I'll never forget being on the stage the day Bill resigned, retired early, whatever people want to call it, whatever happened. And I'm standing on the stage and I'm going to give the closing prayer. And he walks down. And I thought he was just going to go to the bullpen, where the pastor sits and the family sits, and he literally up and left the building.
Yeah.
And I remember standing there on that stage and I felt two primary emotions. One, like I could have just started weeping.
Yeah.
Because in one sense, I'm like, I remembered my youth pastor, Hal, just saying, you'll spend seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, seasons, years, decades to build one thing that can be lost in seconds.
Yeah.
And that's your integrity.
Yeah.
And just sit and stand in one of the biggest auditoriums, the best sound, one of the largest budgets, who've done some of the most amazing good. And all of a sudden, overnight, the decisions that had been made in secret had come to the surface.
Yeah.
And I realized in that moment, he'll probably never step foot back in that building again.
Yeah.
And I felt it. The second thing I felt was the mantle. Who's going to pastor these people now?
Right.
Who's going to shepherd people towards the truth? So you had this sense like, oh my goodness. And I felt like for the people, like I stayed in that room. I was one of the last people to leave that auditorium, and the amount of people who were wrestling with, I got saved here.
Right.
Like my life was transformed here. There was so much good what do I do with this? And there was this cognitive dissonance of, I don't know what to believe. Yeah. And you come back to the real question is, why would he do this?
Right.
Why did this happen? And it's easier as a human to go, why did they do it?
Right.
The harder question to ask, why do I do it? And why do I say things I wish I didn't say? Why do I feel the temptation to tweet things I wish I didn't tweet?
Right.
Well, and I just wanted to try and wrestle through conversations around formation, around therapy, and around the biblical text to kind of go, why do we do what we do? And what does the scriptures have to say about it? So it was informed by what happened, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate the fact that you keep coming back to, and it's not like an author coming back to the book, because we Steve and I know each other. We talk offline, but you have not made the failures at Willow Creek, Bill's failures and failures of governance and the failures to listen to survivors and more. You have not. That's not been the focus of your ministry, though. Again, you've been very vocal in support of survivors, and I'm thankful for that and more. But at the same time, you have wanted to look inside yourself and ourselves. I think with the caution I would say with that is, we need to be very careful, because when we say there but the grace of God go I, but we've got situations that are abuse and others, that's not the same thing. So we want to say,
totally.
Right, and I'm just clarifying that in case anyone's listening. I know we've talked about this. I want to make sure that we're not saying there but the grace of God go I on situations like you walk through and others. But I do think, you have a fascinating journey that's very painful. We joked in a very appropriate time, but that you on your bio when you're at Willow Creek, your bio at Willow Creek said, I went to Michigan because a guy named Rob called me, and so creative, and I was just so amazing, and that was Rob Bell, but you didn't say that on your Willow Creek bio, and then now in a sense, you become teaching pastor at what Forbes magazine called the most influential church in the world outside of the Vatican, and because Bill recruited you, and now that has. And again, just so we're very clear, the very different situations between Rob and Bill, and with all the caveats that are there. I appreciate that from your pain of seeing and struggling through some of these things, the thing beneath the thing is something that you would write and administer to me, and I think it's going to minister to other people. So I want to encourage people to get that. So in the midst of all that. Because I want to, and you've told these stories different places. I want to talk about, what happened that morning after that New York Times, or I want to talk about those things. And we could talk about things, but you talk about those things other places. So what more about your own journey would you want to share here that then impacted the book you wrote, either Willow or elsewhere? And then let's get back and continue our conversation a little bit more around the book. But what more from your own life shapes this, even from the Willow Creek or other situations as well?
Yeah, what's interesting is I had a really great experience at Mars Hill.
Yeah.
I was there from the jump, and we left Southern California to move to Grand Rapids because my parents had come to faith, and we got connected to Mars Hill. And I showed up, I think, week 7, and we're at Leviticus 7, and
wow.
And so I was a film major, and it was through what I saw happening at Mars Hill that God used to say, I want you to go do this. I went back to California. And then Rob invited me because someone had pulled him aside and said, Jesus didn't change the world by speaking to the masses. He changed the world by having disciples. So who are you pouring your life into? And I moved into his basement, and he's been really good to me.
We've listened to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and you shouldn't live in the pastor's basement. That's been a recurring theme in the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. But keep going.
But I would say my experience with him has always been really, really good. Even on August 5th, when I left, he was in Brazil and heard about it, and he called me. And so it's a different thing where I feel like, for him, he's either a 1 or a 5 on Amazon. People either hate him or love him.
And he's taken a different trajectory theologically. Again, in no way connecting to the same thing with Bill. Yeah.
But I learned parts from him, and then to go to be with Bill, and Bill was like, it was consistent. It was 40 some years building something, the origin story. It's pretty remarkable. And so I think, like, for me, the piece and even listening to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, it's been just a bit of an eye-opening experience. Episode 2, I'm at the Raleigh airport, and I'm listening with my eyes closed just as I'm waiting to board a plane, and I hear Bill's voice. That's the first time I heard his voice in 3 years. And I totally jumped, and
wow.
And there's this part of, like, just profound sadness. It's just sadness. And so I just think in all of this is realizing the truth of, for all of us, including myself, we all have to do work. And if there's anything that's redemptive about Twitter, it's the truth will come out. It just will come out.
True.
And so let's get ahead of it, and let's find the practices, the spiritual exercises, and discovery of sanctifying grace that Wesley talks about that can really make us whole, holy, and spiritually healthy.
The Wesleyans will like that. I often tweet, character catches up, people figure out, and they do.
Preach.
Yeah. Steve, for church leaders right now, that they sense that I might be going through the thing. Like, they don't know yet, but they don't want it to become the thing that becomes, beneath the thing. How help them walk through that? Like, if there's a situation and they know that there could be a buildup, and they know that it could affect them long term and cause trauma, and you have to be careful for triggers. Like, if you're going through a situation, what are some things that you can give to them to navigate the situation?
That's good.
That's great, Daniel. First thing is, Jim Kress, he's a counselor. He told me, Steve, whenever you get hysterical, it's most likely historical. And so if you think about this just from a pastoral side, if there's a moment you're in a meeting and you're like you feel like vamped, like you are angry, you are defensive, you are just scared, like it's most likely historical. And I just would say, if you're finding yourself having those level of feelings, you probably need some help to get you there. It might be a therapist, might be a spiritual director, it might be another pastor who's maybe a decade down the road who can just walk with you. But I think just starting to listen to your body. If you find yourself like with rabid, insecure thoughts that are happening, man, that's most likely historical. So where's that coming from? And that's going to prevent the power of your words from the pulpit. And so I think, for me, I'm a sports guy. It's, Daniel, you and I connect over this, but when Tiger Woods, he wins the Masters, and what does he do? He recognizes there's something in his swing that's off, and he breaks his entire swing down, and people like couldn't believe it, but that's how committed he was to his craft. I think for the church and for the pastor, we have to be committed to our craft and our character. And if we don't go back and get curious about those issues, that trauma, that pain, that people-pleasing tendency, it will be found out. Because it just will. And so for me, I mean, every Monday I'm in a counselor's office.
Yeah.
You can't hold the stories that we hold on the regular, and it not do something to your soul. You can't be in social media with 51% of the people loving you and 49% of the people hating you, or the other side around, without like it doing something to your mind and your heart. And we need guides. We need to actually finish the race. And every time I get in my car and I drive home from preaching in the weekend, I just kind of pray these little words: thanks be to God, I'm one weekend closer to finishing well. Wow. And that's what I want to do, is I want to finish this race well.
Yeah, we're actually recording from our side at Billy Graham Hall. And just on the other side of this wall over here, we had Ray Ortland was in here recently teaching a class, the cohort of pastors that I brought in. He just left Emmanuel. I think he's an Anglican now. Did I tell you he was an Anglican now? Yeah. Everyone becomes an Anglican. It's a Wheaton College thing.
It's the trend.
And all the cool kids. But he said, this is right after Rabbi Zacharias, and he says, if there's one thing I owe you, he's talking to the students, he says, it's to finish well. And I think that this has just been a pretty shattering few years about people not finishing well. And what I love about, again, the book's The Thing Beneath the Thing. What I love about your book is it's not just some like idea, I got to finish well. You mentioned you're driving up for church today. I got it 1 week closer to finishing well. But there's stuff there's work you got to do. And I love the fact that you just casually mentioned you see a counselor. I think that's good. I think pastors should mention that, right? But there's work you got to do. So why are we sometimes oblivious to the fact that our past experiences are driving our present behavior? How do we become more aware? Big theme of the book. How do we become aware, and why are we so oblivious to the replay and the tapes that kind of come out and cause some of the challenges we have today?
I just think we're so busy. And then when you also feel the pressure of, I got to be in front of 150, 3,000 people to 5,000 people on Sunday, you just feel like, I don't know if I can open up this box. And I think part of it is a logistical calendaring issue. I think two is I've known how to manage all of this stuff in the past. I can manage my stuff. And truth is, you can't. And so, and anytime is, a counselor will tell me, whenever you react, you're just reenacting the past. And I want to be someone who responds differently. And Dallas Willard had a great line. He says, grace is opposed to earning, but grace is never opposed to effort. And it takes the effort to get that sanctifying grace into every past trauma, abuse, every choice that we've made, every broken pattern and sin. And I think for us as leaders and as pastors, we have to go first. We have to model what we are saying and preaching and proclaiming, that grace is the best thing, that we can be honest, that repentance is beautiful, that we can acknowledge truth about ourselves and go first. And if we can't do it, our congregation's not going to be able to do it. And so for me, I just feel like this is the work of surrender. This is the beauty of walking in the steps of Christ. And unfortunately, I think for many of us, we probably have more of a Constantinian kind of view. It's more conquering. And it feels soft to actually look at what's really going on. But unfortunately, what are people talking about? I'm not talking about all of the great ministry that Ravi did. They're talking about what was on that phone, right? And so you think that's the lasting memory, that's the lasting storyline. And now every time his name is mentioned, it's all the other people that are attached to it and what they're now doing with their life. And so it's just the collateral damage of it. And the truth is, like, when we're sinning or whenever we're doing our thing, we don't think about what our kids are going to have to carry, what our congregation's going to have to carry, what our staff's going to have to carry, what our staff's kids are going to have to carry. We don't think about that. And until we can actually begin to recognize, oh my goodness, the collateral damage is deep. And the healthiest gift that I can give to my family, to my congregation, to the kingdom is a life that's fully surrendered to God, the beauty and the brokenness, and to be honest and human about that and do your work.
So let me take Ed's question like another level. What if you're someone's subordinate or you're working with somebody and you see them struggling with the thing, but they can't name it for themselves, but it's now impacting everyone. It's impacting the team. It's impacting their family even. And as somebody who's maybe working alongside of them or, one of their subordinates, how do you help them become aware without, and maybe it takes confrontation, I don't know, but help somebody who might be in that situation think through how they might help somebody become more self-aware?
It's a great question. So 2 thoughts come to mind. First one is something my dad said. I brought a girl home from college once. And I was really curious of what he thought. And he just said to me the next morning after, she had left the night before. And I just said, hey, what'd you think, Dad? He goes, hey, it doesn't matter what I think. Like, you know what really you got to understand is that every person has crazy in their closet. You just have to realize which crazy you can live with and not spend your entire life trying to fix or change, but that you can pray for. And I remember going, that's genius. And then
I'm actually gonna call my wife right after this podcast and say, "Honey, I got crazy."
I got crazy.
She'll be saying, "I know."
I know. But then I got into the bride of Christ in the church, and I realized every church culture has crazy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes younger leaders, they step into a church staff and they don't know what questions to ask. They're just excited about the opportunity. I want to know what the crazy is. I want to know what the culture's like. I want to know, like, will I wake up every day trying to fix something that culture doesn't want to be fixed? So you just got to know, like, well, can I love this culture and pray and do what I need to do to help it become everything Christ wants it to be? Or am I going to be beating my head up against a wall, just going, this has got to change. This has got to change. This has got to change. Second thing I'd say this is, and this will be a poker analogy. I don't really play poker, but I was fascinated with why is it on ESPN?
Can I just say that I'm far more aware of poker than sports, so this is going to be a plus.
Okay.
So, all right, I'm ready for this.
But like, I didn't understand why it was on ESPN, and so I just started researching it. And most people play the cards in their hand when they're playing Texas Hold'em. They're dealt like pocket kings, and they're like, dude, I'm gonna win. But it really doesn't matter, really, because what matters is your position at the table. What matters is kind of like the people that are still in the hand. And what matters is how many chips you have in your pot. And so, like, for me, I started to realize, like, man, you might actually have the truth, like pocket aces. This works with evangelism, or it also works with like conflict, like you're talking about. But you might not have the position at the table. They might not see you. They might see you as less than. They might not have given you permission and you might not have chips of influence to actually go. So there's a bit of like emotional intelligence and cultural awareness that you have to be able to go, do I have the permission, the position, the cards, and the influence at the table to be able to bring that up and say, hey, I love you, Daniel. I'm so for you. But I saw this in you in this meeting, that I saw you react. And can you just help me understand? But if you see me in a different way, you're not going to hear it from me. And then all of a sudden, I'm going to put myself in harm's way. So now there are sins of like where you're like, man, you were a little defensive. You lost, like, I felt like you were a little prideful. That's one thing. There's obviously egregious sins that we're talking about of abuse of power and literally like sexual sin or financial issues or time, like we've got to actually deal with. And there's probably HR policies, but like places that you have to be able to go to. But for me, I'm just trying to, if I have the permission, I have the position, go as a loving brother and just say, I love you. I'm for you. I saw this, and I'd hope you'd say this to me if you saw this in me. But can you help me understand? And then begin to walk with them through that.
And of course, that's, I mean, gosh, you were here in Chicagoland. I'm in Chicagoland. I mean, Chicagoland has been uniquely impacted by pastoral failures in a way that's, I don't know if there's anything like it right now in the last decade or so. I spoke on This Invitational Life, which is a great book. You were talking about evangelism, talking about reaching people, and now you're talking about the thing beneath the thing. And it seems that God is doing some cleansing, addressing some issues among his people. And I want to be among those who deal with what's in me, because there's stuff in me. There's the thing beneath the thing in me. I grew up in a broken home and whole 9 yards. And I recognize my dad and I are very close now. And someone asked me one time, said, why do you have 2 masters and 2 doctorates? So I was trying to prove something to my father. And he says, well, did your father think that way? No, my father hadn't thought that way for like 50 years. But I'm still trying to prove something to my father when I was 7. And so one of the things, growing in awareness has been a good thing. But it's almost people think that it's going to be okay if I just keep my head down, keep doing the work, keep following Jesus, keep serving Jesus, and don't let Jesus do the work in their heart. So how do I say to pastor or church leader, our audience, right? This is the Church Leaders Podcast. How do I say to a pastor and church leader, it's not going to be all right if you don't address it? You might not be on the front page of the New York Times, but it's not going to be all right. It catches up.
Yeah. It's amazing, Ed. You helped plant so many churches, and sometimes I'd sit with pastors and I'm like, I remember being at Willow and I would ask some pastors from different cities, like, hey, tell me about your vision. 99.9% of the time, it was the vision of their church. There's no vision that they had for their life. And if you think about Dallas Willard would talk about in The Renovation of the Heart, VIM, vision, intention, and means. And I think everyone has to have a vision for themselves. It's just something that they're literally like waking them up, trying to almost be shaped and formed in the image of Christ. So for me, my vision right now is a life anchored in Jesus is one that has nothing to prove, nothing to lose, and nothing to hide. And now Dallas would say, you have intention. Every choice that you make is helping you live into that. Will this help me live out my vision or not? And then the M, the means or the methods are the practices that will help you embody that vision. And I just think for some of us, we might do the practice of Sabbath, or might do the practice of silence or solitude, the practice of prayer. But I often wonder, is that actually connected to a trauma or a pain point or a pothole in our story? Or are we just doing it because we think we should do it? And so for me, what I'm realizing is that sanctifying grace has to go after those pain points. Nothing to prove, nothing to lose, nothing to hide. I'm the most competitive, achievement-driven person on the planet. And it's good for me to be reminded a life anchored in Christ has nothing to prove, nothing to lose, and nothing to hide. And now how do I create practices that begin to shape that inside me so that I can be more like Christ and not like an achievement workaholic?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned grace, and you're getting at my next question that I wanted to ask you. As somebody who is working through the process and they're trying to deal with the thing, and they just don't know if they're getting there. For me, it's a performance mindset. So I'm thinking, I need to get better now, so I'm going to try to fix myself. But you perpetuate the cycle because I think like a performer. So what does it feel like to know when you're operating in grace, when you're dealing with the thing in grace? Like, give me an idea of how it might feel like.
Yeah, for me, it's more just in the sense of the invitation to know Christ. the invitation to trust Christ, the invitation of like exhale. I know what it's like to, slap the floor, dive for every loose ball, hustle to try and like make it on the team just to be good enough. Like the drive, Ed, as you were talking about, with multiple degrees to try and get this person's approval. I know that feeling in my body, like when I'm reaching, instead of I'm allowing the Spirit to like reach and heal me. It's the moment of like when I'm studying the scriptures and I know what questions to ask of the text. It's the other thing when I open up the text and allow it to ask questions of me. And it's just that opening myself to the Spirit to see, God, what is it that you have for me? And it doesn't feel like work. It feels like an invitation into the deeper streams, into just the sense of God being with me in the midst of that. In 1 Timothy, Paul says, even though I was once a persecutor, a blasphemer, a violent man, but God showed me this immense patience, this mercy. And then he says these words, because I acted in ignorance and unbelief. And I think that there's so many times where we as pastors, we just acted as kids or college students or 20-somethings or 30-somethings or 40-somethings in ignorance or unbelief of what Christ could do through that pain or that trauma. And for me, it's just recognizing the immense patience Christ shows me isn't something I'm proving or managing, but I'm allowing to wash over me and help me become who I desire and who I believe God desires me to be.
I love it. I think we're at a place where pastors are going to have to make some decisions. People listening to this podcast, some of right now are listening and say, well, I should do this. I want to do this. I want to be like this. I want to walk in this truth. But they're struggling. They're unsure. They're like the performative reality of their job is coming right now to mind. Well, but I've got to do this. So I want to encourage people to get the thing beneath the thing, what's it inside, and what God helps us to do about it. What other things would you recommend? You mentioned your own counseling journey. What other resources and ideas, in addition to the thing beneath the thing, would you say, Pastor, church leader, if this is your area of need right now, here's where I want you to step into? That'll be the last question. Go ahead.
Hey, the last thing I would say is just one simple practice that I do typically on Sunday evenings or Monday mornings. It's from Proverbs 4:23. It says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything flows from it. And so the simple practice is I just look back at the past week and I play it back. And I just think, hey, was there some area where I didn't guard my heart? And I just go, what was happening there? Was I tired? Was I stressed? Was I hungry? What was going on? And then I spend some time playing it out. I look ahead to the next 168 hours and I go, imagining myself in the same situation, but I imagine not reacting or letting the past dictate, but I go, Christ, how would you want me to respond? I almost like just play it out. And then thirdly, I don't just play it back or play it out. I play it smart. Because if everything's going to flow from my heart, how am I taking care of my heart this week? What do I need to do? Is it with practices? Is it date night? Is it being in God's word? But what am I doing to play it smart and really refuel my heart? Last thing, not just play it back, not just play it out, not just play it smart, but I play it honest. And too many pastors, how you doing? Good. No, how are you really doing? Decide to play it honest. Your feelings have movement. That's why they call it emotion. And until we can acknowledge what we are really going through and deal with that, I promise you, you will connect more with your congregation because this is what they are having to wrestle with. If we don't do this work, we are going to prevent our people from doing that work. So let's go first, play it back, play it out, play it smart, play it honest. And through that, let God use you to do incredible things for his glory and his kingdom.
You've been listening to some incredible insight from Steve Carter, the author of his newest book, The Thing Beneath the Thing. You can also learn more about Steve at stevecarter.org. Again, make sure you grab his book, The Thing Beneath the Thing. And hey, thanks again for listening to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast. You can find more interviews as well as other great content from ministry at ChurchLeaders.com. And if you found our conversation helpful with Steve today, we'd love for you to take a few moments, leave us a review on iTunes. That'll help other ministry leaders find us and benefit from our content. You can find this podcast as well as other great Christian podcasts on faithplayapp.com, available for both Apple and Android. We'll see you in the next episode.